Hello, Mordarim here. In today's video I want to show you my min-maxed Frostwit Sorcerer build guide for Diablo 4 that utilizes the Blizzard and Ice Shard spells to absolutely obliterate everything before you. This build features immense clearing speed, incredible AoE capable of deleting entire screens of enemies in an instant, top tier single target damage and near impenetrable defenses, all of which is done without exploiting anything. There is not a single bugged interaction to be found here, which means no fear of nerfs due to fixes in the future. Now as for the content, high nightmare dungeons are a breeze due to the defensive options available to you. Damage is also very high. You can safely play at maximum range while Blizzard, Ice Shard and Frozen Orb off-screen dangerous targets. But you can also zoom past them while utilizing Frost Nova, Deep Freeze and potentially fire spells like Flame Shield to prevent enemies from moving or damaging you. You also deal insanely high damage while doing so, allowing you to speed through dungeons at insane speeds. What about the newly added bosses? All of them are basically pushovers. Doriel is the only challenging thing, and even that, he can barely damage you. The only thing that's potentially dangerous are his adds, and only because they deal a ton of poison damage. This makes it possible to attempt farming him very early on, allowing you to get access to the Tibault Will Pants. Those fix your mana issues while also providing you with a ton of additional damage due to a multiplier that comes with them. You can and will infinitely spam blizzards without ever thinking about going home. And as for Uberlilith, this build is more than capable of defeating her. Your damage is high enough to beat her in seconds. Her one-shot phases can also be safely ignored, with Deep Freeze as well as Flame Shield providing you with not one but two invulnerabilities. You will however still have to get good to blast her, but it's much more accessible to the average player. Now with that said, let's have a look at the planner. It's a fully written guide with multiple chapters. If you want to read up on something, you can do that just fine. If you want to have a more detailed look at the leveling with this one, make sure to check out the 1 to 100 progression guide. Otherwise, if you have any questions or remarks, make sure to comment down below or in my Discord. Now, since this one is an endgame guide, let's have a look at the skill tree. The skill tree is very basic. We pick 2 points in Frostbolt just as a filler. We need 2 points in the first basic tree, otherwise we cannot progress to the rest. So we max out Frost Shard, pick the Enhanced Frost Shard, pick 4 points in Frozen Orb, 1 point in Enhanced Frozen Orb, 1 point in Greater Frozen Orb. This will give us AoE vulnerability at range. In the defensive cluster, we pick up 5 points in Frost Nova to diminish the cooldown. We pick up Enhanced Frost Nova as well as Shimmering Frost Nova. Why Shimmering Frost Nova? Because we want as much mana regeneration as possible. I like to have it. If I make a mistake or if I need to spam my Unstoppable, I will not be able to regenerate my mana with this item. Tibault's Will. Tibault's Will give you 50 primary resource, which scales with resource generation. So if you have something like this one on the ring, there is resource generation here, you will increase the mana recovered by this item. So if we are unstoppable, which we are with teleport, as well as with our dash due to metamorphosis, we're going to regenerate mana. I will talk about this interaction a little bit later, but for now, let's go over the skill tree a little bit more. So we have 3 points in teleport, we pick up Flame Shield for another invulnerability, we pick up 1 point in elemental attunement, so we have a chance to reset all of those cooldowns. We pick up Glass Cannon because we basically do not care about the 9% more damage taken here. The 18% increased damage taken is much more valuable to us. We are extremely tanky anyway, so we don't actually feel this one. In the next 3, we pick up the passives, Align the Element, Mana Shield for 21% damage reduction, and the Protection. Protection gives us a 30% maximum life barrier for 3 seconds after using a cooldown, which basically counts for Flame Shield, Teleport, Frost Nova, as well as our Deep Freeze. So we get a massive barrier. This barrier scales with maximum life, so we stack maximum life on our gear. You will find multiple gear pieces where I recommend this one. On the rings, maximum life. On the chest, maximum life. On the pants, if you do not have Tibault's Will, maximum life. In the gems, maximum life. So maximum life is very valuable for you because of protection. Then in the next cluster we pick up Cold Front with Icy Veins. Cold Front will make it much more likely that we are freezing enemies, for example bosses. We are increasing their stagger bar much more efficiently with this one because we generate our shields through protection, through teleport and so on and so forth, and then we freeze enemies faster. We have Blizzard, just 1 point here, Enhanced Blizzard as well as Mage Blizzard. Mage Blizzard increases the duration of our Blizzard, so we can stack more damage because we are using Glacial Aspect, which spawns ice spikes that deal damage. So we don't actually need to level our Blizzard. Blizzard is actually not a good damaging spell, but Glacial Aspect makes it a good damaging spell. Then you have Deep Freeze, again with an aspect down here, that's the aspect of the Frozen Tundra, spawns again ice spikes, but primarily we picked the aspect of the Frozen Tundra because of the 50% increased explosion radius of all ice spikes, meaning the Glacial Aspects ice spike will also benefit from this. Yes, your Deep Freeze will deal more damage with it, but primarily we are interested in that 50% increased radius. So we pick up Prime Deep Freeze and Supreme Deep Freeze. Supreme Deep Freeze will now make it so that after our Deep Freeze ends, our non-ultimate cooldowns are reduced. This means Flame Shield, Teleport, as well as Frost Nova. So we basically can become invulnerable through Flame Shield, then use Deep Freeze, and then use again Flame Shield. We have insane defenses here. Then for damage, we pick up Hoarfrost, we pick up Permafrost, and we pick up Icy Veins. And for the Keystone Shatter, that's the skill tree. So after the skill tree, let's have a look at our equipment. Now for the equipment, I have two recommendations for uniques. We have the Tibault's Will and we have the Harlequin Crest. If you do not have the Harlequin Crest, which is an uber rare and needs to be farmed, so this one is very, very, very rare. However, it's the best in slot helmet. The 4 ranks to all skills benefit us greatly. Frozen Orb, Ice Shard, Blizzard, all of which are benefiting through this item. If you do not have this helmet, you can look down below in the defenses here, that's the defense and resistance tab. If you do not have the Harlequin Crest, you can use the Snow Guard's aspect. The Snow Guard's aspect is the Blizzard one, so you receive 25% less damage taken while in a blizzard or 3 seconds after you leave. If you do not have the Harlequin Crest, you can look at the gear stat priority down below. You want total armor, you want maximum life, you want cooldown reduction. The other aspects are Aspect of Disobedience on a chest, gives you armor. Stormswell aspect, since we're generating so many barriers, we basically always deal 30% more damage because targets are always vulnerable. This is done through Metamorphosis, so we are vampiric cursing enemies, and through the Prey on the Weak, enemies that are affected by the vampiric curse are also vulnerable. So we basically have permanent vulnerable on priority targets. Then Tibault's Will. If you do not have Tibault's Will, you are not in the endgame. So look at the leveling guide, which you can find here. This one is required for the absolute endgame, for the pinnacle, because otherwise you need to play a little bit different. You cannot use your Metamorphosis to regenerate all your mana and you will have downtime. So you're going to use your Frostbolt. If you have the Tibault's Will, go for this build. Tibault's Will increase your damage after getting the Unstoppable buff by 20 to 40%. You get damage reduction, you get resource capacity, there is a ton of benefits for this item, and your potions also regenerate a little bit of mana. So this item is packed with utility, it's really, really good, and it's best in slot for your pen slot. For the boots, go for the Exploiter aspect. 20% increased crowd control duration is huge, especially on the freezes. And if an enemy is unstoppable, so if they break out of your freeze 2 times, so they need to break out 2 times, you can Frost Nova them, then freeze them again, and then they get the Unstoppable buff. Afterwards, you will have 20 to 40% increased damage. There is a few things we are utilizing here, so a few damage increases and a more multiplier on our weapons, so the aspect of control will not work on those enemies. However, we offset this one with the Exploiter aspect, so it's not that bad, especially on bosses. But if you freeze someone, make them vulnerable, you're good to go. You're going to hit for 250k per Ice Shard. So that's around 1 million per cast. And when you stack multiple blizzards on top of each other, all the explosions stack from the Ice Shards, so you're going to deal insane amounts of damage. So with the aspect of control, when you CC an enemy, you're going to deal even more damage. So that's really, really good. The Glacial aspect goes on the Amulet because we want to increase the base damage of the ice spikes as much as possible. 50% more damage is much more valuable than any aspect we can find. Then we have the Prodigy's aspect. This will also recover mana on a cooldown use. We have Flame Shield, we have Teleport, we have Frost Nova, we have Deep Freeze, all of which will recover mana. Combine this with Metamorphosis and Tibault's Will, and you will regenerate mana beyond your comprehension. Like your Teleport will refill your complete bar with just 1 cast. You can infinitely spam your blizzards. And lastly, you have the aspect of the Piercing Cold. Now, the gem section for the weapon go for the Sapphire, for the armor go for the Ruby, and for the jewelry go for Skulls. Except, well, a few things. Let's have a look at the defenses. Your cold resistance will be taken care of by the Paragon Board. Your lightning resistance will need 1 topaz gem in the jewelry. So you can only slot in 2 skulls. You need a topaz gem. And your fire, shadow and poison resistance need to be fixed by your gear. Or you can sacrifice your 2 gem slots on the rings or amulet and ring and use 2 gems so you can save on an affix. Now when we look at the boots, one of those affixes is either shadow or fire resistance. The other affix is sitting on the chest. So you want poison, fire or shadow resistance on your chest and 2 of the other on the boots. Those are the best places for those. So you can trade in 2 skull gems on your rings, for example, so 500 armor for one of those affixes, so you can get ranks to Frost Nova on your boots. This is the trade-off. You trade in basically Frost Nova cooldown for a little bit more survivability, but there's Frost Nova cooldown is also survivability, so it evens out. So those are the gems. As for the stats on your gear, since I already mentioned those, poison resistance, maximum armor, total armor, all of those are defensive stats. Those have priority on your gear. The damage reduction from distance, you will only find one time, because there is a ton of damage reduction on your skill tree, on your Paragon Board, on other aspects that you basically don't need on your gear. The FXs are spent much better on total armor, maximum life, resistances, ranks to ice shard, crit chance, attack speed, frozen orb ranks, ranks to teleport, movement speed, and so on and so forth. So all of those are on the gear pieces if you look at the talent planner. On the amulet, you will find the ranks to Hoarfrost passive as a last priority. You want the mana cost reduction, the movement speed as your priority. You want the total armor, because if you're running this setup, you will need total armor on your chest and total armor on your amulet, then stack up disobedience. And with this setup, you will be able to reach this magical armor value. 13,441 armor is the sweet spot. That's 85% physical damage mitigation, reduced physical damage taken. It is important that you get this one before you attempt 90 to 100 nightmare dungeons. Otherwise, they are going to one-shot you. By the way, also max out your resistances. So those are your defensive stats taken care of. The damage reduction is on top. So get your armor up, get your resistances up, and then the damage reduction. And again, for the rings, crit chance, resource generation, maximum life, and cold damage. You will find there's cold damage here and here on both. There is nothing else on the other gear pieces. This one has mana cost reduction, resource generation, crit strike chance, cooldown reduction, so utility based. All of those are here to fix your mana cost. The damage is done through the Paragon Board. The only damage you really get is through intelligence, all stats, damage to chilled enemies, damage to crowd controlled enemies. All of those are basically found on the Paragon tree. So when we look at the Paragon tree, you will find a ton of different glyphs, and all of those have increased damage to chilled targets, increased damage with ice spikes, you will have increased damage to crowd control targets, and so on and so forth. But I will go over the Paragon tree in a little bit. First, let's have a look at the Vampiric Powers. You have Call Familiar. This one deals moderate damage, not that much. I think it's 30k with the current setup for me, but it has a chance to stun enemies, a 30% chance. So if you stun an enemy and if you freeze an enemy, you have the aspect of control and you also deal more damage. So this one is quite valuable. However, you can actually replace this one for the Accursed Touch aspect. So if you inflict a Vampiric Curse, you have a lucky hit chance to spread it, 15% chance, and your cursed souls also deal more damage. So you can spread your vulnerable much easier. It's an option. I personally still like the Call Familiar. Then you have Pray the Weak. So your Vampiric Curse now applies vulnerable. You deal 16% increased damage to vulnerable targets. You have Domination, Stunned, Immobilized, Frozen, Feared, all of which you deal increased damage to. Undying gives you a heal, so that's your heal source. You need to have this one on your Vampiric Powers. It's the most important Vampiric power. All your sustains comes through this one. Metamorphosis is next. This one changes your dash to be much quicker, instant. It looks amazing. It deals damage and inflicts Vampiric Curse. A Vampiric Curse, the Vampiric Curse then makes targets vulnerable, and then you deal more damage. And additionally, you become unstoppable for 4 seconds. This then stacks with Tibault's Will, so you generate primary resource. Since we have so much resource generation on your rings, on your offhand, you will increase this one to 80, so you refill your whole bar with just 1 dash. However, this buff will stay on your character for 4 seconds. Tibault's Will reads, when you become unstoppable. So if you have the buff already, you need to wait until this one falls off, and then you can reapply Tibault's Will. This makes the rotation here very important. So the boss rotation. Tibault's Will regenerate mana only when applying a new Unstoppable buff. The Unstoppable buff needs to fall off before that. So you cast your Blizzard until you're then you dash to apply Vulnerable, Unstoppable, and you replenish your mana. Then you cast again Blizzard until you're then you use your Frost Nova, cast Blizzard, then you use a Teleport. This will now replenish your mana through this ring, Prodigy's aspect. Most likely you are not going to be in time for this buff to fall off, and the teleport will not refill your whole bar. If you're running around and dodging things, teleport will refill your whole bar. Then you use your Blizzard as much as possible, and then you go back to the dash. So you apply again your Vulnerable, Unstoppable buff, replenish your mana, and so on and so forth. So that's your basic rotation. If you fail to maintain this one, use a Deep Freeze. This resets it. So that's for bosses. What about the rest? You teleport and dash through enemies, then you cast Blizzards and Frost Nova and everything dies. For elite enemies, cast your blizzard, so you need to preemptively cast one blizzard. This will then, after a while, trigger the ice spikes. You frost nova, you dash through enemies to apply the vulnerable status, and then you use your ice shard key to burst them, or use more blizzards if there are multiple enemies. You can also use your deep freeze to AoE clear if the target demands it. So if there is a lot of enemies and you're stressed out because you cannot get out, press your deep freeze. This will clear the whole screen, deep freeze deals and a lot of damage. You can teleport afterwards because the cooldown resets, and you get a barrier that's really strong. So it's basically impossible that you die in just one hit. And then you have also your flame shield. Now flame shield is very useful versus Uberlith to survive that fight. Otherwise, even for high nightmare dungeons, you don't really need it. But it's another button you can press. Now, speaking of bosses and nightmare dungeons, there's two choices to be had here. You can go with Firebolt or Frozen Orb as your enchant. So you can choose Ice Shard and Frozen Orb, or Ice Shard and Firebolt. If you choose Firebolt, you're going to deal more damage to bosses. The Firebolt enchant is better for bosses. It gives you additional skill points, Devouring Blaze, another multiplier. You can use your Flame Shield again with both setups. It doesn't really matter. But the Frozen Orb enchant gives you AoE vulnerability, better chill, more AoE damage. So this one is better for nightmare dungeons. So the choice is, do you want to focus on bossing currently, or do you want to focus on nightmare dungeons? The Frozen Orb enchant is perfectly fine for doing bosses. However, Firebolt enchant is better for this. So if you want to min-max and respec for the boss, it's only 7 points. You can do it. So the 7 additional skill points go into maxing out the teleport. Then grab Flame Shield if you didn't already have it. Then grab the Inner Flame passive. The Inner Flame passive is basically only a filler, but it opens up the possibility to grab Devouring Blaze. Devouring Blaze is 21 additional more multiplier on burning targets when you critically strike. So when you critically strike, you deal a lot more damage. This also demands that your amulet has the Devouring Blaze passive, because Hoarfrost is not as useful versus bosses. Devouring Blaze will be active all the time. Hoarfrost not, only during the stagger window. So you need 2 amulets with this setup if you want to min-max it. Like I said, the skill tree already reflects this, but if you're coming from the leveling guide, you want to decrease your Frostbolt by 1 rank and grab the Flame Shield. At the end game, you don't want to include the Frostbolt or Firebolt in your skill bar. Flame Shield is your friend. So the skill bar is going to look like this. Here is a little bit more explanation on high nightmare dungeons and bosses, but something that I also always want to talk about are poison enemies. They hit very, very hard. They deal a ton of damage. Your barriers prevent poison from taking, by the way. So that's also a benefit of this build. But if you see poison enemies, try to off-screen them. Try to keep them away. Try to CC them. Try to burst them. Do not engage with them in longer fights. They will kill you. This is very, very important. And like I said, there is a little bit more explanation on the scaling, how everything works, and a little bit more explanation on the defenses. You can find everything in the written guide. So make sure to check this one out. Now, as for the Paragon Board, let's go over this one. In the first Paragon Board, you want to enchant the glyph. So pick every node here. So path this one out. In the next one, you want to path immediately to Frigid Fate. Then go grab Tactician in this cluster. This will give you a ton of cold resistance. This cold resistance stacks with the maximum resistance you get here. Since we are using 2 cold enchants, or 1 cold enchant and 1 fire enchant, we get either 5% maximum resistance to cold and 5% maximum resistance to fire, or 10% to cold. So this one is defensively really strong. Then you path through here, grab the Winter Glyph. You will have 1 additional node here, the Dexterity node here, but you do not want to grab this one. That's not a mistake. You need that point elsewhere. Then you path through here, grab the Keeper nodes, grab the Icefall node. So Icefall, your Frost skills deal 15% increased damage to vulnerable targets, doubled when frozen. Bonus damage, vulnerable enemies, 10% of your bonus damage to cold, so we stack cold damage. We get this one to around 27 to 30% with endgame gear, with optimized endgame gear. So we can fully utilize this one. This one works with non-physical damage. So if you find nodes like this one or this one, 10% non-physical damage, this one is 1% more damage automatically. And it stacks because we have this in the increased bucket and we have this in the frigid more multiplier bucket. Afterwards, we go to the next board, the Elemental Summoner board, grab the Frostbite glyph. We basically grab everything here. The maximum resistances are really good, not so much the conjure damage, but you get really easy willpower. And then you move on to the next one. The next one is the Enchantment Master node. We don't want this one. 20% stronger enchantments. It's really good, but in a really awkward position. So it's hard to get this one and generally not worth it. So you grab the Stalagmite glyph. This will give you insane amounts of damage for the stalagmites, the ice sparks that explode. 10% additional crit chance. And the last part is the Key/Conduit legendary node. grab the control glyph in here, max this one, and then finish up with the elementalist node here. So step by step, go from the first node, then to the second, then to the third, and so on and so forth. Focus on the Paragon boards here. So max out this glyph first, then this, then this, then this, then this, then this. Really important to grab the additional threshold bonus, because those are usually more multipliers. So it's 10% more damage here, 15% more damage here, 10% crit here, 20% more damage here, and this is resistances and less damage taken after enemies are no longer frozen. Because if they break out of the frozen status, they are going to retaliate and deal a lot of damage. You cannot control them, you cannot chill them, which then diminishes the effectiveness of nodes like damage reduction from chilled enemies. So all of those only work while enemies are CC'd. If they have unstoppable, you need to mitigate the damage otherwise, and this one helps with that. So this basically sums everything up. If you have any questions, please cross-check the talent planner, comment down below. I will try to answer every question you have. If you are going to level with this one, check out the leveling build. It is much more optimized for leveling. Otherwise, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already. You can also join the channel membership or leave a donation if you have the spare coin. And see you next time. Bye.